vote yes in this vote. If you want to continue debate, vote no in this vote. All right, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay. All those in favor, please stand. Okay, all those opposed, please stand.
And then those abstaining, which I am, I'm crossing.
Okay, so everyone please stand, abstentions, please stand. What was the vote counting?
The vote count was 12-24. And then the abstention don't count. And that was a total of 36, and 2 36 is 12.
So it, that's one. Yeah, so no. I was thinking, okay, so debate continues with 12 minutes right now until someone takes.
Next motion to let people left guys. After we run out of time. It's still up 12. Okay. All right.
Okay, so, all right, you can't go home, we got 12 minutes again.
Okay, what's that? First I would say that, I don't know about any of the people who are using the items that are taught in listening that.
Yeah, sorry to hear.
It's their job, and I get that. I just don't believe that it was, the greatest decision ever, and, in cases, accounts that happened, yeah, some people have different experience. But, they're not all those people. I'm actually to go through, I don't know about you guys, I think this whole problem is a much bigger problem that we have here in our country. That now protests and riot are being used synonymously. So, when someone sees a protest, even a law enforcement, yes, it's going to be totally safe. And I feel like in this day and age, they may have not thought that this was safe or unsafe. So, I think we should support our students in this situation, because in this specific situation, they were being useful, and we should support people protesting as much as possible now, considering there's a lot out there that becomes unsafe and unpeaceful. As well as whether or not we have constitutional powers, he is very beneficial. What they say the first time something happens, they keep saying, we've heard from you multiple times that usually will not change because that's what we do. And I'm not saying that's bad, but listen to ourselves. We're saying, let's hear from you again. He's going to say the same thing. So whether or not that changes your answer, I'm just going to tell you, it's just going to say something. So if you don't hear me now, I'm not going to hear you later. It's not going to anyone else. He's going to have time, so keep this.
That's actually like almost half of what I wanted to say. I'm not going to argue whether the decision was correct or wrong. I'm not going to argue that the was the purpose of it was right or wrong. We heard a lot of speeches from both parts. What I'm concerned about is what's going to happen next. Okay? Like as we all heard, everyone is either for or against. I really urge everyone, whether they're students, administrators, anyone here, get out of that mentality. Either for or against. We come together as one hand and see what's the best for everyone. Just like administrative, I think the point is for us. We all break the law. I mean, caught speeding sometimes, an officer will come up and they will tell you we're speeding, but they will let you off with a warning. It's one across. Like, if anyone watches the videos, if anyone saw what happens, yes. Whether you agree or disagree, but I think that's what I use for the students. Let's educate ourselves more. Let's urge ourselves and urge everyone around us to have an open dialogue where we can talk and prevent something like this from escalating, happening again. This is the last thing we want to happen. And again, the number is really big. 57 schools. We should not be like this. We should not be arguing whether they should be like elected or not, or have charges against the proper or not. This is what can we do to make this better? What can we do to make this like get the best outcome out of the situation? Whether it fix the negativity that came out of it, fix the mistakes that came out of it, the miscommunication, the disconnect between students, police force, faculty. We let this work and fix the whole thing. I was
So I just like to say that I think this whole entire thing is very much a gray area, no matter how we vote tonight, I'm not going to either decision. But as they said regarding the tonight, I think that the morals of the situation are so different from what the situation we got. I 100% don't think that anybody should have been arrested. I don't think it was handled properly. But I also believe that the students were given fair warning of what's about to happen. And Alyssa, I'm sorry for what happened to you and other people like you that really think. Like it really does. But on the whole, there were many students who knew exactly what was happening to them. And I'd like to point out that around the time the first mention of arrest was being mentioned and they were going to arrest soon, it was about the same time that our students had to be started. It's about, we were talking about the same issues that they were talking about. We were voting on whether or not we were going to come out to the private campus. We were voting on whether or not we wanted to become a sanctuary campus and move forward with that. And many of those students went on to Twitter and went off asking where was Jenny Hall Jones. Jenny Hall Jones was sitting right here working on those same issues that they were talking about. They could have come and given their 3 minutes to speak out. We're talking about nothing in the students. They're given 3 minutes for anybody who wants to come and talk here. And any of those students could come in here at 7:15 and have their voice heard over the live stream that whoever happened to be watching. See Jenny Hall Jones was right here. They could have looked her in the eye and talked to her. I just feel that there were other avenues that could have been discovered, and I agree that they shouldn't have been kicked out of Baker and shouldn't have been arrested. But at that point, you have to think about the war and not the battle. There are other productive ways to handle these sorts of things. And I don't think that I think that we need to look at not their moral reasonings of what happened, but the fact that there are other things that can be done.
I'd like to take a second to reiterate the importance of separating the issues that are at hand here. Kirby just mentioned that it's a really, really layered issue, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. The decision that we're being asked to make tonight is whether or not we want to have charges dropped that were made against students who willingly violated the law and university policy or defied law enforcement members. The reason that they did so in this decision does not matter. And let me be clear in that I am not separating ourselves and our emotional or our community investment in what these students were standing for. I applaud you. I know there are a few of you still here who are taking part in those protests. It is commendable to do your civic duty. It is admirable to stand up and put yourselves on the front line for what you believe in. The decision that we're being asked to make does not take into account why students were protesting or what they were protesting for. Kim left, but I wanted to thank her for sharing those words by Dr. King. She also mentioned that making an analogy featuring the KKK is just not possible. And in this situation, while it's distasteful and it's disgusting to put the two groups in the same circle, I actually disagree. I think that there is one common denominator, and it's the exercise of the First Amendment right and free speech that we all are saying is so important, both sides. I haven't heard a yay or a nay argument to this resolution that hasn't emphasized the importance of free speech and the protection of the First Amendment right. That applies to students who are opposing the ban, that applies to students who are standing for sanctuary campus, it applies to the KKK, it applies to Trump supporters. If that's what we're fighting for, it has to be for everyone, which means that the decision that we make tonight sends a message to every student, not just the students in the room who were protesting, not just the students who chose to be arrested, not just the students who left. It sends a message to every student that we represent. And so I want to take a moment to call to mind the role that we have here in this room, which is to represent the entire student body. And in doing so, highlight a few of the alternative routes that some students have taken in response to the executive order in response to sanctuary campus. We've had all of you, the wonderful protesters, or excuse me, the wonderful sponsors on the sanctuary campus bill and the sponsors on this bill who are taking a stand in the Senate room to take action to the administrators, which then goes on a state level to pass tangible legislation to push for your stance. Hannah, Nick, and Landon, who have been working on a state level with our state representatives to collaborate with institutions across the state to make a stance to our state representatives to oppose the executive order and hopefully have it rescinded. That's tangible action. Annika, who spoke with us earlier, who has been working from the day that the executive order came off with student legal services, and she mentioned being the chair of the board, to get the appropriate information to students, to make sure that resources are accessible, and to make sure that information is being spread amongst the university community for those who are affected. Hannah Borowski, who I know works frequently with the international community and who I have worked with to even talk to students about what is happening and what their resources are and how they can be affected. I don't think that conversation stops here. I think there's plenty more to be done, but those are some routes that students have taken to respond to this and to assist students who are affected that don't violate the orders of a university law enforcement officer or that don't violate the law in any sense. I think that important topic that keeps being brought up in this conversation is citizenship. It's important to recognize that those who are arrested and those who are protesting were doing their civic duty very well by speaking out against something that they don't feel is right that was put out by our federal government. That is doing your civic duty, and that is admirable, and you should be applauded for that. Part of what falls under the title of citizenship is also respect for the policy and the law that exists to keep us all safe. And I think it's important to highlight that whether or not we agree with the fact that this law or policy superseded in this case, whether or not we think OUPD handled it well, whether or not we think the administrators handled it well, whether or not we think that there is much better that could have been done, there is still a level of citizenship to doing what we need to do and responding as best we can and still abiding by the law and respecting that. Just to touch on the note that was made of protocol over people, I just want to highlight the fact that we get a really cool, unique privilege in looking at this retroactively. We get to sit and we get to see everything that happened, and we can look at videos and we can analyze and we can say, like, this is what happened that shouldn't have, and this is what was right and this is what was wrong. And just being raised by a first responder, I can say that in that situation, the police department or in any other sense, someone whose role it is to respond to any situation, that's not what they're thinking about. They're not sitting down with pads of paper and videos and saying, what do we see? What can we change? What's different than what we've seen before? Protocol is now a dirty word in this room, but in that sense, these things are decided ages and ages in advance, because when someone is called to respond to a situation, whether it's a protest or a shooting or a natural disaster, they need to know what to do and they need to be able to rely on their team to do it. I can tell you right now, like, those members of the police department have trained for hours and days and months to be a part of that team, and they trust each other. And I think that it's important to highlight that the conversation doesn't stop here. We need to sit down with OUPD, bridge the gap. The students who are arrested should be able to sit in a room with them and say, this is what was messed up about the way that you handled this situation. This is how we think you can handle it better in the future. I think that that's a productive way that this body can act, by bridging those gaps between the administrators, saying, we know that Dr. Hall Jones and Dr. Pina were in this room with us working. We know that Dr. Patton was in Baker Center. Why didn't you address the students? Why didn't you make a point of communication? Even if it was to simply say, I hear you, I'm not going to address this matter with you, but I hear you. I think that those are all things that could have been handled much better from our leadership. But that's a conversation that we need to take and move forward with. Touching back on, we keep asking why the protocol couldn't change in that moment. And I can't speak for OUPD or Chief Powers, but knowing at least what I know from the perspective of a first responder, that's not what they're here for, and they aren't going to do that because their job is to keep us safe. I would call on everyone in this room to not let the center of the conversation be, are we going to push for the charges to drop or are we not, and is that the bottom line? Because there is much more to be done, and I think that this is an important example of how, thank you.
We could just set the date time to allow the remaining people on this list and only the people on this list be heard.
Sorry. Colin, you still think it wasn't started there?
So the motion just now was to clear the first time speaking list so that everyone who has not spoken at all would get a chance to, and then debate would end. That was the motion that was presented.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Abstentions? All those in favor, please stand.
Miss Al, how much time do I have left? How much time do I have left? Okay. No, we do, we restricted to. Oh, we never did that. Well, are you going to restrict? Sorry? It was actually a filibuster, got you. Nobody was like, stop. Remember, I'm like, it's kind of
Okay, there was 31 votes, and so just by math, it passes. So we will hear from the rest of the people on the first time call on.
So discussion was cut off. Can I make a closing line, or would you like to move on to Kira? It's up to you. I won't talk. I won't make it 8 minutes long. I promise.
No.
Okay. Wait a second. Hannah's my president.
Okay. Kiara. Okay. Joe.
Okay. Obviously, this issue goes way further than just like the internal issue of the university. It's the overall law of our nation. It's constitutional, and you have to act with precedent of the constitution because as set by the Supreme Court, which is time, place, and manner. That's the standing precedent of this issue. This individual issue, and I was talking about how these issues are built for case by case basis. So if I'm not mistaken, this bill is for this single protest. To say that the single protest was handled wrong, it's not really constitutional, which is why the protesting constitutionality in the first place of other issues. So they understand constitutionality. And I mean, as Nick highlighted, time open, it was open, place public, a place that people aren't intuition, and there is. So I mean, the argument was made that precedent was going to be set by this bill that said any protest was just like a get out of jail free card. I believe this bill is just for this single protest, and that's how every protest needs to be taken care of on an individual single basis. That's how police handle it. That's how law enforcement handle it. So I mean, we're deciding about this protest. Just to find out how it works. Universities historically been places for a moment when movements of this nature happen. Consciousness is expanding, ideas are shared, this tradition is remain intact, and the fullest of freedoms is granted by our nation's conception of justice, as stated by our Constitution
And remember, if you you don't have to say anything because you're on this list, and I don't hear that. Purple shirt.
Sorry, lovely back here. Sorry.
Actually, it's fine. Just a couple comments, clarifications, responses to arguments made earlier. I would say that we immediately complied with all the requests the police made, except the request to leave. As soon as we got in there, the police actually told us that we were not supposed to congregate there. That statement was actually spread throughout the rest of the protest. I'm not sure why he said it wasn't. All of us did hear that, and we immediately asked, how can we make this better? He said, clear the pathway. We immediately cleared the pathway. That's probably why we were allowed to sit there as long as we did, because that was being done. An hour and a half before we started getting arrested, give or take a little bit. Next, on the conversation about an individual and a larger conversation, saying how we cannot condemn all the police officers for the actions of you. I would say that in that we have to apply the same argument towards the protesters, because they said that they thought that the protests were going to escalate as soon as they saw the sign being ripped out of some protesters' hand. Therefore, we should not be judged by them, especially because as soon as they ripped the sign out of that protester's hand, the rest of the protesters immediately condemned them, which is why the sign was given back. The rest of the protesters were not on board with that sort of action. We wanted it to be purely non-confrontational and non-violent. Whether we really disrupt things is a bit unclear, especially because
because students report not being able to hear anything from any of the floors below. I actually left the protest for being outside for a meeting that I had on the second floor. You could not hear the protest until you got to the top of the elevator. And of course, you couldn't hear from the first floor or anything like that. The question of whether we actually broke the law is still a little bit unclear, which is going to be decided in court. The police decided to take us because it's a dangerous situation. That's unclear, and our lawyers said we have the case for us. And they said during the faculty senate itself that they want to keep the protesters from coming back. When they were asked, how can we let them arrest protesters? They said because we want to set a precedent and want to keep the protesters from coming back. The comment was made, okay, so you just want to keep all of the protesters away, and there was no response to that. I'm just going to take from that they don't want us to be protesting, they don't want us to be making excuses, they don't want us to talk about our issues in a public space. So you can take that as you will. However, my opinion on that is by voting against the students, by voting against this resolution, you are siding with that mindset.
Sorry.
Hi, I'm Ruby. To go off of people were saying that the police were just doing their job, that there was no political affiliation, and that they had no feeling for it. I want to reiterate that there were a lot of people there who were upset because, as you've heard, there are a lot of counter protesters that were there, Trump supporters, people who wanted a ban to happen. And I want to say that they were talking to the cops, they were laughing with the cops, they were discussing with the cops. And when we were sitting there, the cops would not make eye contact with us. They would not talk to us at all. Also, furthermore, they said that everybody in the vicinity in that area would be arrested, but those people were not arrested. They were allowed to stand there the entire time, and nothing happened. Furthermore, Jenny Holt-Jones, I would like to address you directly. In the 2014 sit-in, you came there, you addressed their grievances, you basically showed up. This time you didn't, and now that I've heard that you were here and you were aware that your phone was playing up, there was Twitter, I am disappointed in the fact that there was no channel of communication, no contact with any of other people in higher administration to basically come talk to us. Because all of this could have been prevented if a higher administrator had come and discussed our grievances. All we wanted was that, and that was our demand, and all of this could have been. That's what we're talking about.
First of all, I don't know if you remember, but a few weeks ago was MLK Day. Some of you probably participated in the march, probably went to lunch. How are you going to go support, like, MLK did not follow the law. I don't know if you remember that or not. One, okay. Two, we have a pledge. Thing called the Walkout Pledge that is supposed to be like advocating for everybody who is marginalized and underprivileged, who does not have the voice to speak up for themselves because they are oppressed. And so with this body, we are privileged enough to speak on behalf of them. We are supposed to hear that and speak for them. And what I'm hearing right now is you're silencing them. Like if you choose to say it's, you don't have enough information about it, information right here. People came and gave you their testimony. People live this and you're ignoring it. And also, we want to talk about legality. So long ago, Black people didn't come into this institution. People, like, if you want to, like, we stick to what is, quote unquote, like, what we're supposed to do, change will never be made. That's the reason why we progress so much information, is because we weren't afraid to be different, we weren't afraid to take the quote unquote unpopular side. Lots of more things than legal. Like, I personally thought this was not pretty great.
what did you have that you know you were the person who made the call to arrest them? But I'm really disappointed by a lot of you, honestly. Specifically people who say that they are very intersectional, they claim this, they claim to like be allies. An ally listens to the people who are being oppressed, and they don't ignore it. Like just because we didn't go through it doesn't mean it's not real. And it sounds like we're making it less valid because we want to protest. And for me, I'm so sorry, but that was really rude of you to say that like you could come to the street speak out. Like very different things. These people took very large amount of time to organize this protest. It represented much different people in walks of life. They were looking at the bigger picture, and I don't think people are. And I'm so sorry it's so long, and I feel like I'm just like talking down to you, but I would like us to do better than what we are right now in this moment, and I hope that you can take it first, don't take it back. This is just to challenge the law. When you're a law, you grow. And yeah, I think that's it. Sorry. Wait.
Okay, so as was so readily pointed out earlier, Steve's words, how it's not injustice to these protesters to be arrested because of the march. However, I think it's really important to know, I'm talking a lot about legalities, that there are many other instances where police have detained protesters to defuse the situation, however, did not press charges. There's so many that come to mind, especially for our commission, like the Stonewall riot, which were much more aggressive than sitting in a circle and peacefully discussing. I think and that was in 1969. We would like to think it's gone a long way, come a far, far away from there, but I don't think like we have. So like just for instance on that, there were only 4 people arrested for Stonewall riots, whereas 70 arrested for peacefully protesting. And it seems so. I mean, I was not there. I was actually riding on campus. Unfortunately for me, I would love to have been there. But from what it sounds like compliance was a pretty important part of the protesters' portion and how they acted. Given I was not there, I did see some videos, but I was not there. I can't speak upon it. But I think it is important to note that we need to take a second and analyze how the professionals in the situation, meaning that the police officers, Chief Powers, how they took action. Because like I said, they could have just easily detained the situation, detained the protesters, defeat the situation, and moved on from there. I especially did not realize that any of the anti-protesters, so the individuals who were for the ban or for the truck or whatever they were anti-protesting, were not arrested almost in the same sense that any of the other protesters were. Even though, like Courtney said, it is the First Amendment, and it is important that everyone gets the umbrella of the First Amendment. However, it did not seem to allow the case. Again, I was not there. However, so anyway, like she said, citizenship is to speak out, provide by law still as well. I think that is important. I know protesting is the entire point of protesting is to push those laws, to speak out, to show that we have an issue with what's going on, we have an issue with what's going on. I think ultimately on campus you will find that. However, I think that again, it was severely unwarranted for all of these peaceful protesters to be arrested, as opposed to in a few situations being farther upon of what it could have been. So it seems that was a very recurring topic, was that it could have turned violent, however it was not. And then they were arrested on something that was not violent, was inherently peaceful. And like she had said earlier, they had even given signs back to the Trump supporters. Like that is showing so much working together, that is showing that they even respected the opinions, the opposing opinions, people who were there only to dismantle what they were doing and still took the time to respect that they have an opposing opinion. And I find it severely problematic. As the president, we should set, like you said earlier, it is this protest. And this protest is important to a lot of people, and it is important to myself individually, but it doesn't affect like the reason behind the protest. However, I think that it is important also that I know if I would have been on campus that day, I honestly, even though I do very much take my commitment to Senate seriously, I think it is important to know that I probably would have been at that protest instead. That's not at all saying that I don't take my commitment very seriously, but it is saying that we should not condemn protesters because they weren't here talking. And students speak out because how often do you hear about students speaking out at Senate? But this made news. This was a huge deal. That's getting visibility that you wouldn't otherwise have. And also, to my gentlewoman, I totally appreciate you. So, like, you being here, that's not anyone's fault. I do think that how it was handled by administration was an issue. I don't particularly think it was on Judy Jones, however, because again, she was here doing her duty here. There's not much else to say about that. However, I do think that her being here, that responsibility should have been given to somebody else. So that an administrator should have been there to talk with these students, to listen to them, to at least say that they are valid, their opinions, they're being heard. It seems like that's all the do on it.
I will make it super quick. I just want to say that we all should have the utmost respect for the individual policemen and policewomen on our campus. Chief Powers is like a really mental figure on our campus. They do a lot of hard work and they don't finish. So, but that's not to say that I can be disappointed in the actions that were taken by the system that evening. And also, our devoted administration, again, getting a lot of shit this past week, but they're out there, butts sitting in these chairs, they have families, they're still here. And that's really, like, I wish every protester that was blaming all of us on administration would be say different now. I really believe that we have to the best of faith, but really there's a huge divide between students and administration and the police force right now. And that's because we're not taking the right steps, we're not spending our time, we're not allocating our time correctly. We're talking to one another, students to students, who like disagree a little bit, but like we do need to hear the administration side. That needs to happen. I have spoken to something completely opened my eyes to whole other ways to think of this situation. And I was there. I had my butt on the ground when people were being arrested, and I threatened my own arrest for about 10 minutes until I gave up. I was like, nah, I have other things to do in my time. And it was intimidating. It was terrifying. Like, you heard the descriptions. It was not what I thought like police force should be doing in that moment. So I go send this bill home that to address this protest, but also to address the disconnect between administration and students. I want to raise the debate at our university, whether that be for sanctuary campus or against sanctuary campus. I want it to be out there. I want anybody to be able to sit where they want to sit and get understood and be shared, no matter what they may be. Thank you.
I mainly just have one question. Did Dusty Billboard give any sort of statement, any call to police or anything? He's the person that oversees Baker.
Yeah.
So he gave a statement?
I don't think he did, but he was the one that alerted the police
Alerted
that
the
there was
police.
a plan to get an application of Baker.
Okay. And then I guess I give a rest of my time to you.
So there were some students who were arrested and were involved in the protest who just had some things they wanted me to say, so I thought it was important to hear their voices. Olivia Busby wanted me to say
If you want to talk about the moral reasons for breaking the law, think about the fact that the only reason black students are able to be at the same school while white students get called the N-word is because people made the moral decision to break the law. Don't praise MLK one week and talk down the students who did the same thing the next. Brittany Mitchell said, we were actively trying to communicate with administrators and students who were texting Jenny Hopkins directly with no response. Danica Bickley said, during last night's faculty senate meeting, President McDavis wrongfully reported that no one was injured during the protest. A truer statement would have been that no one would have been injured had the police not escalated an otherwise peaceful situation. I watched white men and women be led away without being zip tied until they got into the ballroom. Most people of color and queer people were zip tied immediately and treated more roughly. My own wrists were bruised and swollen, and afterwards, and I later found out my right wrist was sprained. I know at least one other queer person who was injured. The way we were treated by police was unacceptable, dehumanizing, and I think that that both the police and the university need to be held responsible for their actions. Olivia Busby specifically wanted me to ask Nicole and Zach why they want to trust the police force that arrested them over the voice of their students that they're supposed to represent. I would like to remind you all personally that we are not a court of law in this room. We are an advocacy group for students. We need to do our job to advocate for students tonight. I reserve the balance of this.
Hi,
No,
sorry.
I know, no. Register.
Are you here for resume items, or are you here to serve the voice of students and now, your boss family is calling you to send out your students, based on administration, those who are coming for you and have pursued further education have passed resolutions similar to this last night. Those who teach you have already passed a resolution earlier this week for what's coming. Lastly, I want to point it out, I wanted to remind you of your boss athletic. Now, your chance to all of you on your pledge, make this your body and your
Okay, so debate is over, we're voting now. Right? Okay, all those we're voting on the bill, just to be clear, we're voting on this bill. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Division, all those in favor, 16. Against? Yes. $27,710 is the vote count. Yes, vote passes.
We have pressing budgets that should be passed, sorry, my contact is all out of whack. But if we could, I'm going to use a rarely used parliamentary rule, but I motion. What's that?
Yes.
Move to approve the rest.
Yes, I agree to that, but I do not want to add, and it's my duty to say that I do not want to add resolution 161781, a resolution to compensate the official panel. I do not want that to be in the consent agenda. The consent agenda is we all approve them as a whole. You don't have to read them off. We don't have to have separate debate about it. We just approve it as a whole, but I do not want the resolution to compensate the official panel to be added, because I want that to be safe for a later date. Or resolution 161783, a resolution to reset the points. So, yeah. So you're only voting right now on 77, 78, 79, 80, 82.
Okay, so if you want to know what those are, I can tell you really quick. So, 77, International Affairs Commission, 78. Okay, so we're voting for a consent agenda. Okay, yeah, so.
Yeah, you can keep it.
Okay, so this is what we're voting to form a consent agenda, and then we have to vote on it.
No, the consent agenda can be agreed by any member who decides you don't want to have them on the consent agenda without approval.
Okay, so we're voting on the consent agenda, which is a resolution to appoint international affairs senator, a resolution to appoint a senator to the Resident Flight Commission, a resolution to have supplies for sex week, a resolution to purchase school books and copy paper, a resolution to appoint a youth fund senator. So that's the consent agenda. So you're voting on for all of those resolutions, pass them all at one time right now. Okay. All those
vote.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, they all pass.
And I move to table resolution 161781 and 161783.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Okay, abstention? I think it passes. So that'll be tabled for the next week. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Hey, y'all, before you leave, we have made the person that is going to be in this room very late, so please pick up your trash and push in your chair. Thank you.
Also, read your emails tomorrow. There's important announcements from the executives.
We'll be emailing reports.
Everybody that signed up